In a final act of bureaucratic malice, the Postal Service managed to deliver the impossible precisely 5 months and 6 days after Evelyn Thorne's funeral. Clara hadn't noticed it until she was standing in the center of her grandmother's inherited kitchen, the detritus of the morning mail, utility bills, charity pleas, and a frankly insulting offer for debt consolidation strewn across the counter. Only one item remained isolated in her hand, thin and brittle. It was addressed in her dead grandmother's wavering script. "Oh, for heaven's sake," Clara muttered, convinced it was just another insurance document the lawyers had missed. But then she registered the details, the distinctive lavender scent Evelyn always insisted upon for her correspondence, the looping, confident capital C in Clara's name, and the telltale date stamped next to the postage, June 14th. Evelyn had suffered her massive stroke the following morning, June 15th, and had been gone by dusk. Clara stood motionless, calculating the odds. A letter from her cremated, organized, and deeply practical grandmother, dated the day before her death, arriving months late. She used a butter knife to slice the wax seal. She unfolded the single sheet of thick, creamy paper. The script inside was rushed, jagged, and filled with a terror that clawed at the polite edges of the expensive stationery. "Clara, my darling girl, if you are reading this, I did not make it past the sunrise. I saw it last night. I went to the attic for the storage trunk, and it was waiting." It smiled Clara, and the air went cold. It didn't look like a person, but it used the muscles around its mouth anyway, like a cruel joke. I knew they wouldn't believe me, not after the last time. So I am leaving this proof. I tried to dispose of it, the thing beneath the floorboard, but I couldn't reach, and now it is awake. You must not, under any circumstances, unlock the attic door when the moon is full. The lock must remain closed. The thing is waiting for the invitation. Do not mourn me. Just secure the house and never, ever look for what I left behind. Your loving, terrified Nana. Clara dropped the letter, which drifted to the linoleum. It smiled, she repeated, running a hand through her hair. Great. A homicidal, smiling entity that can also apparently use the USPS in a time-bending fashion. And she couldn't just use email? No, it has to be a physical letter for dramatic effect. She snatched the envelope up again. The sheer, suffocating certainty in Evelyn's handwriting was what truly terrified her. Evelyn didn't do hysterics, she organized them. In the lower left-hand corner, scrawled fiercely in pencil, was a single, cryptic instruction that felt like a clue from a very poor escape room. 5th Street, South, Box 192, June 14th, 3 a.m. The municipal post office was closed at 3 a.m. And Evelyn, a woman who considered driving after 9 p.m. a reckless deviation from God's plan, had been alone. Clara pulled on her coat, muttering about the administrative nightmare this was becoming. First probate, now a mystery mailing location. The house felt oppressively cold, the temperature dropping sharply enough to justify the trip. The drive was brief but tense, the landscape silvered by the enormous, ominous hunter's moon. The box wasn't a standard USPS receptacle. It was a rusted, archaic steel safe built into a crumbling brick wall behind what looked like a diner that last served a palatable meal in 1978. It was labeled only with a faded, hand-painted number, 192. A drop box. A deeply sketchy drop box. Evelyn, who insisted on double-bagging garbage to prevent a stray tea leaf from escaping, had apparently chosen this as her final communication method. She hadn't been mailing a letter, she'd been dropping a confession, using a system so discreet it was practically criminal. And somehow, that confession had entered the postal system months later. Clara returned to the farmhouse. She knew, with a rising sense of horror, that tonight was the hunter's moon, the largest, fullest moon of the year. The moon that fueled the thing. Evelyn's final, terrified instruction echoed in her head: you must not, under any circumstances, unlock the attic door when the moon is full. But she was Clara, not Evelyn. She was logical, practical, and deeply annoyed. She needed to know what she was securing. I am not going to let a piece of cursed stationery dictate my life choices, she announced to the empty hallway, grabbing the key for the padlock. The light in the stairwell was weak, casting long, jittery shadows. As she reached the top step, the air temperature dropped sharply. It wasn't just cold, it was the specific, bone-aching cold of a place where the furnace had died and been replaced by profound cosmic misery. She held her breath, inserting the key into the padlock. The brass was so cold it felt wet against her skin. She pulled the hatch open with a groan that sounded disproportionately loud, like an old ghost complaining about its sciatica. A wave of musty air, laced with old cedar and something sharp and metallic, rushed down. The attic was a single, long space beneath the eaves. Clara stepped fully onto the floorboards, shining her phone flashlight around the detritus of generations. Then she saw it. Near the central chimney stack, a single, loose floorboard. I tried to dispose of it, the thing beneath the floorboard, but I couldn't reach, and now it is awake. Clara knelt, the cold seeping through her jeans. She jammed the tip of the butter knife into the gap. With a squeal of distressed wood, the board levered up. Beneath it was a cavity perhaps a foot deep. Resting inside, perfectly centered, was not a monster, but a small, plain wooden box, no larger than a shoebox. It radiated cold. The chill was palpable, a physical sensation that settled in her lungs. She lifted the box out. It was heavy, far heavier than the wood suggested. As she flipped the brass clasp, the moonlight, pouring through a dusty pane, shifted. The beam struck the box exactly as the clasp released. Inside was a single object nestled on a bed of old velvet, a hand mirror. Not an ornate, beautiful relic, but a simple, tarnished piece of oval silver with a dark, smooth wooden handle. It looked ancient, but utterly plain. Clara hesitated for only a second before lifting it. Her fingers immediately went numb. She raised the mirror slowly, reluctantly, towards her own face. The moment her reflection swam into focus, the horror abandoned all pretense of subtlety. It wasn't her reflection she saw. It was a reflection, yes, but one that was subtly, sickeningly wrong. The woman in the silver mirror was Clara, yet she wore Evelyn's faded cotton nightgown. Her hair was damp with sweat and exhaustion. Her eyes, Clara's own hazel eyes, were wide and staring, filled with the exact, paralyzing terror Evelyn must have felt. The reflection wasn't looking at Clara, it was looking past her, into the dark attic corners, her mouth forming a silent, panicked plea. The reflection wasn't static, it moved independently. Clara watched her mirrored self reach out, a trembling hand attempting to trace the faint, spiderweb cracks on the silver surface. As the reflected hand touched the glass, the lips of the mirrored Clara moved. They whispered 3 words that were not transmitted through sound, but directly into the core of Clara's mind. Heavy with grief and confusion, I dropped it. Clara gasped, stumbling backward, the floorboard crashing down behind her. The vision vanished. It now showed only Clara's own shocked, pale face, bathed in the blinding light of the full moon. The thing beneath the floorboard wasn't a monster, it was a temporal echo, a sliver of Evelyn's last consciousness, trapped inside the mirror's silver. The mirror was showing the past, the frantic moments when Evelyn, knowing she was being hunted, had desperately tried to leave a message. Clara stared at her reflection. She realized what had truly happened. Evelyn hadn't unlocked the attic door to get to the trunk. She had unlocked it to hide the mirror. The real danger wasn't keeping the lock closed. The real danger was looking into the mirror when the moon was full, because the mirror showed the exact moment of Evelyn's death, and now Clara had witnessed it. She saw a faint, new inscription forming on the back of the tarnished silver handle, etched into the wood like a tiny, fresh scar. It was a date, June 14th, 3 a.m. The horrifying truth settled upon her. The thing was the loop itself. By receiving the letter, she had sealed her fate to live out the last hours of her grandmother's terror, destined to see the mirror, drop the message at the clandestine box at 3 a.m., and die before sunrise. The reflection she saw was not her grandmother, it was Clara herself, 5 months and 6 days from now, in Evelyn's nightgown, completing the cycle that had begun this very night. She was not trying to save her grandmother. She had merely been following a map drawn by her own future ghost. Clara stood up, the mirror heavy and cold in her hand. The silence was poisoned now, a quiet void waiting to be filled by her own inevitable, predestined scream. She knew what she had to do. The mirror had to be destroyed before it could capture the final image of her terror and send it back in time to herself. The first attempt to break the cycle was born of sheer, glorious panic. Clara carried the mirror down the steep, creaking attic steps, nearly face-planting on the landing, but never loosening her grip. She reached the kitchen and scanned for a weapon. She bypassed the ornamental ceramic vase and seized the object of true power, the cast-iron skillet. This skillet, a wedding gift that weighed roughly as much as a small dog, was a testament to her grandmother's belief that, if something couldn't be fixed by prayer, it could be fixed by brute force. Holding the mirror steady on the thick, butcher block counter, she raised the skillet. The moonlight, shining directly through the kitchen window, pooled on the mirror's surface. She brought the skillet down with all the desperate force she could muster, aiming for the center of the silver. The impact was immediate, deafening, and absolute. The sound was not the expected shatter of glass, but a massive, deep, resonant clang, the sound of two pieces of impossibly dense metal striking one another. The skillet rebounded, sending a lightning bolt of pain up her arm that made her elbow scream in protest. "Right," Clara muttered, clutching her throbbing joint. "So not glass then. Great. Now I have a temporal curse and an orthopedic injury. This is a brilliant start." The mirror sat placidly on the counter, entirely undamaged, without even a smudge. It felt like the mirror hadn't just absorbed the force, it had violently rejected it, asserting an impossible, non-physical resilience. She tried again, driven by a cold, rising hysteria. She took the biggest wrench from the utility drawer, its had a solid block of hardened steel, and slammed it against the mirror's reflective side, then the wooden back. The wrench simply glanced off, the mirror vibrating slightly, emitting a faint, high-pitched hum, a note of cold triumph. It was not merely hard, it was immutable. It was shielded by a supernatural integrity rooted in its purpose as a temporal conduit. As her failure mounted, the cold in the house intensified, no longer localized to the attic, but seeping from the walls and floors. Clara could see her breath in the main hallway. "It's like living in a freezer," she complained aloud, trying to anchor herself in the mundane. "I saw it last night." It smiled, Clara, and the air went cold. She knew the smiling thing was near. She hadn't seen it directly, but she registered its presence through an unnerving sensory distortion. In the periphery of her vision, the space around the nearest lamp seemed to subtly shimmer, the very light bending and twisting as if trying to flee a vacuum. When she looked directly, it was gone. The air grew heavy with a cloying, sweet floral scent, not Evelyn's familiar lavender, but something sickly and artificial, like dead flowers preserved in sugar. It was the scent of a smile that was fundamentally wrong, like a greeting card signed by a serial killer. Clara snatched the hand mirror, suddenly desperate to get it out of the house, away from the moonlight that fueled it. But as she ran toward the back door, she saw the shadow of the door handle lengthen impossibly in the moonlight, morphing into a thin, elongated limb that seemed to be reaching for her. She stopped dead, heart pounding. "Okay, very dramatic," she whispered. "But you're still not getting this piece of cursed silverware." She needed information, not blunt force. If the mirror couldn't be destroyed by metal, it had to be undone by knowledge. Evelyn had been an archivist by nature. She wouldn't have left Clara entirely defenseless, only meticulously confused. Clara retreated to her grandmother's small, quiet study, a room lined with leather-bound books and smelling faintly of pipe tobacco and old paper. The clock on the wall read 1:45 a.m. 45 minutes, she calculated. Time to find the secret instructions and save the family line, provided there isn't an instruction manual written in Sumerian. Evelyn had kept a meticulous filing system. Clara ignored the labeled folders, taxes, insurance, wills, and ran her hands along the back of the bottom shelf of the built-in cabinet. Her fingers caught on a small, hidden catch. She pulled, and a section of the false back panel swung inward, revealing a hidden niche. Inside lay a worn, leather-bound book, not a journal, but a family history, titled in fading copperplate, "The Thorne Line, Curses and Conduits." Clara flipped it open. The book wasn't a narrative, it was a record, filled with precise dates, names, and chillingly similar accounts of sudden, inexplicable deaths within the family, all revolving around the full moon. The earliest entry was dated 1821, detailing the suicide of one Elias Thorne, a silversmith. Elias crafted a silver looking glass of immense precision, meant to capture the perfect image. He used a rare lunar silver alloy, cast only during the zenith of the hunter's moon. He believed the mirror could capture not just light, but time. The glass failed to reflect him, but instead showed the next victim of the family's old consumption. Elias understood his creation too late. The mirror did not show the future, but demanded a life to fuel the prediction. His terror, captured in the mirror's first use, became the first spark of the loop. A terrifyingly stupid ancestor, in short. Clara added that last sentence mentally. The entries for the last 3 generations were the most horrifying. In 1971, Great Aunt Beatrice was found clutching a photograph of her son. Cause of death, apparent heart attack. Post-mortem noted, she saw her son in the glass, terrified. She tried to warn him, but was paralyzed by the terror. Before the end, she hid the mirror in the cistern. That must have been a miserable plumbing job for the next homeowner. In 1997, Clara's mother, Sarah, died in a sudden, violent car crash 5 months after inheriting the house. Evelyn's entry was sparse, heavy with unspoken grief. Sarah saw an impossible object in the mirror that night. A car, but wrong. The fear took her. The mirror was recovered from the wreckage unharmed. Sarah's final act was to write a series of frantic addresses on a napkin, perhaps trying to pinpoint the location of the drop box. She was too late to mail it, but at least she didn't hide the mirror in the water tank this time. The mirror didn't just show the future, it demanded it. The immense psychological terror of the victim, the paralyzing realization, was captured by the lunar silver alloy and then somehow ejected forward in time, manifesting the warning, the letter, the napkin, the photograph, to initiate the fear in the next victim and perpetuate the cycle. The smiling thing Evelyn saw was the entity that fed on this repeated, generational terror. Clara's hand went to the inscription on the back of the handle, June 14th, 3 a.m. It was the temporal focal point, the precise moment, 5 months and 6 days from now, when her own terror would be fully realized and captured by the mirror, only to be sent back in time to the present day to start the cycle all over again. The key to breaking the loop wasn't to destroy the silver, but to disrupt the temporal exchange at the drop box. Clara looked at the clock. 2:10 a.m. She had less than 50 minutes. She flipped back to Evelyn's final, desperate entry, dated the day before her stroke, June 14th. I went to the attic for the cedar trunk, but I was not looking for storage, I was looking for the key. Elias Thorne wrote that the silver is only a conduit. The true power resides in the wooden box of holding. The box is lined with canvas, but beneath the canvas is a layer of lead, meant to shield the silver from the moon's influence. I found the mirror, but I could not find the key to neutralize the box. The lock is not external, it is inside the wood itself, activated by the proper ritual, or the proper key. I saw it then, the smiling presence. It was not a reflection, it was a shadow in the corner of the room, tall and thin, with hands that seemed to be made of polished obsidian. It was smiling because the loop was complete. I knew I couldn't beat it. I knew I wouldn't make the sunrise. I dropped the mirror into the box and slammed the floorboard down, but my hands were shaking too badly to relock the niche. I took the whole box to the drop safe in town, a desperate, futile attempt to throw the temporal mechanism off course. The letter is hidden on my person. Now where would I hide a key? In my pocket, of course. Why didn't I write this down earlier? Too busy having a stroke, I suppose. Clara snatched the book, her eyes wide. The letter is hidden on my person. It wasn't the envelope itself that was the message, but the paper inside. The original letter. Evelyn had only included the warning and the coordinates of the drop box. The key, the proof, was still missing. The nightgown, Clara breathed, the absurdity of the clue suddenly snapping into focus. Evelyn had been wearing the garment in the mirror's vision. Clara bolted to the basement where the laundry was still stored, untouched since Evelyn's death. The heavy scent of must and stale water hit her. The old washer and dryer sat against the far wall. On a hook next to them, still damp from its last pre-stroke wash, hung the very garment, a simple, pale blue cotton gown. Clara plunged her hand into the single breast pocket. Her fingers closed around something hard, small, and cold. It was a tiny, ornately carved piece of jet, a small, dark, polished stone shaped like a stylized key. It was warm from contact with her hand, a stark contrast to the cold of the mirror. This was the neutralization key. Clara looked at the clock on the basement wall. 2:35 a.m. 35 minutes. She had to get back to the drop box, insert the key into the lead line box of holding, and stop the temporal exchange before her future self completed the cycle at 3 a.m. She ran back upstairs, the little jet key clutched tight in her fist, the mirror heavy in her other hand. As she reached the main floor, she saw it clearly this time, not a shimmer, but a definite visual distortion near the front window. It was tall, thin, and the moonlight did not pass through it, but was swallowed by it. It was a humanoid shadow, rendered in negative space, a void with a mouth that stretched into a wide, impossibly cold smile. The smiling presence. It had caught up. Clara stopped dead. The shadow began to move slowly, deliberately, toward her through the living room. It made no sound, but the air pressure dropped so violently her ears popped. "Well, that's rude," Clara whispered, heart pounding. "Couldn't you at least knock?" She knew she couldn't outrun it through the front door. She turned and headed for the back, slamming into the kitchen table and sending the skillet spinning to the floor. The chase was on. Clara bolted out the back door, the bitter cold receding the moment she crossed the threshold. The smiling presence, it seemed, was currently anchored to the house, but was desperately trying to prevent its escape. She fumbled with her keys in the gravel driveway, dropping them twice. "Honestly, this is why people in horror films die first," she hissed, kicking a pebble. She scooped them up, jammed the key into the lock of her grandmother's sensible, old sedan, and wrestled the jet key and the box of holding into the passenger seat. She looked back at the house. In the living room window, the towering, negative space silhouette of the smiling presence stood perfectly still. It didn't look angry, it looked patient, its wide, consuming smile fixed on her vehicle. It knew the time was the ultimate trap. The clock on the dashboard glowed 2:40 a.m. 20 minutes. The drop box was a frantic 10-minute drive away. 10 minutes of buffer, provided nothing went wrong. And in a supernatural crisis, everything always goes wrong. Clara floored the accelerator. The old sedan roared to life, spitting gravel onto the manicured lawn Evelyn was so proud of. The drive was brutal. The full hunter's moon was blindingly bright, casting the rural road in high-contrast shadows that danced and tricked the eye. Every distant fence post looked like a lurking shadow. Every clump of cornstalks seemed to lean in with malignant curiosity. Then she noticed something genuinely terrifying. The cold was back. It wasn't the systemic, house-wide cold, but a sharp, localized chill that seemed to radiate intensely from the box of holding tucked into the passenger seat. She glanced over. The brass clasp was vibrating violently, and she could hear a faint, high-pitched whining sound, like an old radio tuning into cosmic static. The temporal mechanism, fueled by the hunter's moon, was rapidly activating as the 3 a.m. focal point approached. Then she saw it in the rearview mirror. Not the smiling presence itself, but its effect. The moonlight behind her was being swallowed by a ripple of distortion traveling rapidly down the road, gaining on her. It looked like a distortion in the air itself, a shimmering void eating the light, moving faster than any shadow should. It was using the moonlight as a conduit to chase the mirror, a spectral tidal wave fueled by the collapsing time loop. "Oh, you have got to be kidding me," Clara muttered, flooring the accelerator until the pedals scraped the floor mat. A high-speed chase with an existential void. If I crash, the obituary is going to be so confusing. She reached the edge of town, the dilapidated sign for the boarded-up diner looming into view. 2:55 a.m. 5 minutes. She slammed on the brakes near the brick wall, nearly throwing the box of holding into the windshield. The drop box, 192, looked more sinister than ever under the lunar glare. The shimmering distortion behind her was now less than a block away. It was enormous, filling the entire street. She saw the vague, humanoid outline, the height, the impossible slenderness, and the horrifying, light-devouring smile that stretched from one side of its head to the other. Clara scrambled out of the car, heart hammering a desperate rhythm against her ribs. She grabbed the box of holding, its coldness now an agony in her numb fingers. She was shaking too badly to manipulate the key. She had to use the neutralization key on the box itself, which contained the mirror, to stop the temporal exchange. The key wasn't for a standard lock. Evelyn's notes confirmed it was a ceremonial device meant to activate the lead shielding. She managed to flip the brass clasp. The whining from inside the box intensified to a high-pitched screech. The smiling presence was right behind her. She felt the intense, vacuum-like cold and heard a sound she recognized instantly, the sharp, deep clang of the cast-iron skillet, which must have been projected from the house by the presence as a final, desperate distraction. It landed uselessly in the middle of the empty street. Clara stared at the inner cavity of the wooden box. The lead lining was visible beneath the stained canvas. She spotted the tiny, stylized keyhole carved directly into the wooden base. It was designed to be engaged when the box was open. She inserted the jet key. It fit perfectly. She turned it once. Nothing. The mirror inside simply reflected her horrified face. The presence was here. She could smell the sickly sweet floral scent now, overpowering the scent of old grease from the diner. A whisper, cold and dry as freezer burn, brushed her mind. You cannot stop what is already done. Clara looked at the open box, then back at the towering shadow. she realized the box was designed to be closed. The key must be turned, and the clasp must be shut simultaneously to activate the lead shielding and cut off the temporal connection. The neutralization was an act of complete containment. With the smiling presence's cold breath washing over her neck, she used her thumb to twist the jet key while slamming the lid down with the heel of her hand. Click! The clasp shut just as the key locked. The sound was not a click, but a deep, resonant thrum, a sound of immense temporal energy being suddenly contained. The intense cold vanished instantly. The shimmering distortion, which had loomed over her, flickered violently, then snapped out of existence, leaving only the normal, cold night air and the pale light of the moon. Clara dropped the box. It landed silently in the dirt. She checked the dash clock. 3 a.m. The loop had been broken, but at the exact moment of the temporal focal point, she had survived 3 a.m. She stands up, catching her breath, looking at the silent Dropbox 192. It is over. Then she notices the jet key. It is no longer black jet. It is now made of slightly tarnished lunar silver, and it feels impossibly cold. It has been transformed by the surge of temporal energy. And on the handle of the box of holding, where the small brass clasp connects, a new, tiny inscription is burned into the wood. The current date, October 20th, 3 a.m. Clara realizes the mirror didn't capture her death. It captured the moment of the loop's failure. The mirror is still functional, still a conduit, and now she is the sole possessor of its neutralization mechanism. The loop is broken, but the curse is not. The mirror is no longer sending warnings back to herself, but it is waiting for a new connection. It is waiting for the next full moon. The thought hit her with the weight of a gravestone. The mirror must be destroyed permanently, in a place it can never be found, where the moonlight can never touch it again. And she knew exactly where the only place for such a thing might be. The oldest place. Clara retrieved the box of holding and the new silver key, her mind racing. The curse was a family heirloom, and like all bad family secrets, the answer to its destruction was probably hidden in the most obvious place. She drove back to the house, the journey now silent and empty. The cold was gone, the air inside the car feeling almost warm in comparison to the dread she had just escaped. Back in the quiet study, she reopened the leather-bound family history, the Thorne line, curses, and conduits. She needed Elias Thorne, the ancestor who had created the accursed mirror. She flipped to a section and began reading the almost illegible script, detailing his life and eventual suicide in 1821. Elias was a silversmith, but more importantly, he was a deeply religious man driven mad by guilt. He had intended the mirror as a tool for perfect reflection of the soul, but it had become a tool of fear. His later, more frantic notes, bound into the back of the book, were less history and more confession. The alloy is lunar silver, drawn from the earth on the night of the hunter's moon. It is only neutralized by the key of the obsidian gate, the same stone used to seal the original mine from which the ore was drawn. Jet is the stone of non-reflection. It absorbs light and power. But once used to neutralize the box, the jet key transforms into pure lunar silver, the key of the conduit, which now possesses the power to open the only permanent burial site. Clara looked at the cold, newly silver key in her hand. The key of the conduit. Elias's final notes contained a crudely drawn map, labeled in shaky Latin, to the moon's spring. The map led not to a well or a creek, but to a section of the farmhouse grounds Clara had always avoided, the old, overgrown Thorne family crypt. The crypt was a forgotten, moss-covered stone mausoleum, half sunk into the earth at the back of the property, rarely visited and generally ignored because, frankly, it was creepy. It was where Elias Thorne, the mirror's creator, was supposedly buried, his grave unadorned due to his disgrace. Clara realized why the crypt. The moonlight could reach everywhere except the earth's deepest, most forgotten embrace. If the box of holding was placed within Elias's grave, the curse could not restart. But the crypt door was a massive, granite slab sealed shut with no visible handle or lock. Elias had made sure his prison was permanent. Clara raced out the back door again, this time armed with her phone, the box of holding, and the terrifying, shining silver key. The crypt was at the edge of the woods, 100 yards from the house. The full moon, now descending toward the western horizon, cast the stones in a sickly, gray light. When she reached the granite entrance, she saw the massive stone slab, impenetrable and final. But there, embedded in the stone, was a depression, a keyhole shaped not like a standard metal lock, but like the stylized, ornamental jet key she had just used. "Oh, you have to be kidding me," Clara sighed. "It's a two-part key." "Elias, you magnificent, melodramatic idiot." She inserted the silver key of the conduit into the depression. It slid home with a satisfying thunk. This time, she didn't need to turn it. The silver key, charged with the temporal energy of the loop's failure, was itself the catalyst. The massive granite slab of the crypt door groaned, a sound like 100 years of repressed secrets being released, and slowly, agonizingly, began to slide sideways, grinding stone against stone, revealing an entrance of absolute, total blackness. The air rushing out of the crypt was stale and thick, smelling of dust, mildew, and something mineral and profound, like deep, undisturbed earth. Clara turned on her phone's flashlight. She looked down at the box of holding, the curse contained within. She had to go inside. She had to bury the mirror with its creator. She stepped into the darkness. The stone steps were uneven, slick with moisture. The crypt was small, consisting of a single chamber. Her flashlight beam cut through the blackness, revealing dusty, simple niches lining the walls, older thorns, long forgotten. In the center of the floor stood a single, plain stone sarcophagus. No name was inscribed, but a small, tarnished silversmith's hammer lay resting upon the lid. This was Elias's final resting place. Clara approached the coffin. The stone was damp and cold. She knew, with a certainty that transcended logic, that she had to put the box inside the sarcophagus itself. To her horror, she saw that the stone lid wasn't a solid piece. It was carved with a faint, decorative line around its edges, indicating a seam. The lid was meant to be moved. She pushed against the heavy stone, but it wouldn't budge. "Come on," she grunted, pushing harder. "I just broke a temporal paradox. I am not going to be stopped by a poorly fitted lid." Then she noticed the silver key still resting in the door. She looked back at the lid. Elias's spirit, she realized, was still insisting on a final ritual. She walked back to the entrance, retrieving the silver key of the conduit. When she returned to the sarcophagus, she placed the silver key directly onto the seam of the lid. The key began to glow with a faint, internal moonlight. As it glowed, the heavy stone lid of the sarcophagus groaned, the sound echoing unnervingly in the small chamber, and slowly, impossibly, slid open. Inside, the interior was a cavity lined with rough-hewn stone and surprisingly little bone dust. Elias had clearly prepared for this moment 2 centuries prior. He had left a small, central space, exactly the size of the box of holding. Clara knelt, the cold of the grave floor penetrating her jeans. She gently placed the box of holding into the prepared recess. The moment it settled into place, the light vanished from the silver key, and the air in the crypt suddenly felt neutral, neither warm nor cold, just still. She stood up, retrieving the silver key. The lid, which had been suspended a few inches open, slammed shut with a deafening, final roar. The loop was truly broken. Clara scrambled back out into the moonlight. She retrieved the silver key from the door and then watched as the granite slab, responding to the absence of the key, slid back into place, sealing the crypt forever. She stood there, breathing in the clean night air, the clock reading 3:05 a.m. The curse was contained. She had survived. But the silver key in her hand was still cold, and she knew the story wasn't quite over. She was the only one in the Thorne line who knew the true nature of the mirror, and she now held the key of the conduit. She was the guardian. She looked up at the moon, which was now beginning its slow descent. The smiling presence was gone, but the threat of the full moon remained. The house was hers, the curse contained, but the responsibility was now a cold, silver weight in her palm. She drove back to the house, the sun due to rise in a couple of hours. She had an immense amount of cleaning up to do, starting with a cast iron skillet, a wrench, and a butter knife that were currently scattered across the town and her kitchen floor. And perhaps, she decided, she would change the locks on the house. Permanently. And maybe invest in some heavy-duty blackout curtains for the attic window. Just in case. Clara didn't sleep. She couldn't. She spent the remaining hours before dawn in a state of hypervigilance, so profound it felt like a low-grade fever. She did, however, clean. First, she returned the cast iron skillet and the wrench, retrieved from the roadside and the diner wall, respectively, to their proper places, noting that the skillet now had a faint, impossible indentation on its underside, where the lunar silver alloy had repelled the impact. The butter knife, the heroic little tool that had pried up the floorboard, was given a place of honor, tucked securely back into the utensil drawer, forever known as the butter knife of temporal justice. Then she addressed the house. The temperature stabilized. The cold was gone, replaced by the normal, slightly stuffy temperature of a century-old house running a functional furnace. More strikingly, the air was silent. Gone was the faint, constant hum she had subconsciously lived with for months, the low-frequency sonic signature of a time loop perpetually spooling. The silence was the new terror. It was the silence of a stopped clock, the stillness of a predator waiting for its next meal. The key of the conduit lay on her bedside table, its tarnish now replaced by an unnatural, polished gleam. It wasn't just a key, it was a physical tether to the family curse, a trophy of her survival, and an absolute guarantee that the responsibility for the mirror's ultimate fate rested solely with her. When the sun finally rose, washing the kitchen in a reassuringly ordinary yellow light, Clara was on the phone with Mr. Davies, the probate attorney. Yes, Mr. Davies, it appears there was a misunderstanding regarding a parcel Nana needed delivered. It's been resolved, Clara said into the receiver, stirring a mug of coffee that was doing nothing to settle her nerves. No need to worry about the police. It was just, an aggressively late library book return. A family tradition. And the crypt. Mr. Davies asked, his voice crackling with cautious curiosity. A neighbor reported some rather alarming noises near the back of the property around 3 a.m. Said it sounded like thunder and grinding stone. Clara paused, looking out the window at the dense woods where the granite crypt lay perfectly resealed. Yes. That would be the septic system. It's an old house, Mr. Davies. Very loud pressure release. I'll have it looked at. Thank you for your concern. She hung up, shaking her head. The bureaucratic lie was almost as tiring as the existential one. For the next few weeks, Clara tried to establish a routine. She unpacked boxes, painted the living room a shade of aggressive beige intended to ward off bad memories, and tried to forget that her ancestor invented a fear engine. But her focus kept returning to the one object she couldn't ignore, the key of the conduit. She knew containment was temporary. The box of holding could only shield the mirror until the next major lunar event, the next surge of temporal energy. The mirror had to be destroyed. To destroy it, she needed to know its genesis. The family history book, the Thorne line, curses and conduits, had offered hints, but Elias Thorne, the deranged silversmith, had kept a separate, more personal account. Evelyn's notes suggested this detailed account was contained within a large, heavily bound document in the main library of the house, labeled simply as accounts. Clara found the document tucked beneath a stack of dusty volumes on 19th century trade laws. It wasn't ledgers, it was a journal, meticulously kept in Elias Thorne's precise, cramped hand. Clara carried the heavy journal to her newly painted, brightly lit living room, setting it down on a wide ottoman. She opened it to the first entry of the mirror's creation and began to read. The following pages are transcribed directly from the journal of Elias Thorne, dated beginning in late 1820. On October 14th, 1820, the consumption took another piece of my beloved Mary's breath. She coughs now like a broken pump, and the fever steals her sleep. The local physician offers only leeches and prayers, neither of which possess the strength to fight this affliction. But I am a man of science and faith, a student of light and metal. I have observed the influence of the celestial bodies on the Earth's mineral temperament. I believe that pure reflection, a mirror crafted at the height of lunar influence, can capture and hold an image perfectly, not merely of a body, but of a soul, a state of being. If I can capture Mary's health, her reflection before the fever truly took her, perhaps I can force the image to remain, to anchor her soul to this world. I have located the source of the required ore, the abandoned mine near the spring, known locally as the Moon's Spring Mine. The ore is a heavy, dark rock, but when smelted under the specific astronomical conditions, it yields an alloy that shines with an unearthly, silver light. It is lunar silver. I have begun crafting the vessel for the alloy, the box of holding. It must be lined with lead, the dullest of metals, to shield the silver from all outside influence when it is not in use, and sealed with jet, the stone of absolute absorption. Only a tool made of jet can access the sealing mechanism. By December 30th, 1820, the work is done. The furnace burned all night, fed with oak and blessed charcoal. The moon, large, cold, and blindingly bright, was directly overhead when I poured the molten alloy into the mold. The resulting mirror is perfect. It is simple oval with a dark wood handle, but the silver itself is unlike anything I have ever worked with. It does not reflect light, it seems to drink it, producing an image of such absolute clarity it feels invasive. When I hold it, I feel a pull, a strange, silent resonance that vibrates through my fingertips. I have fitted the mirror to the handle and secured it in the box of holding, locking the jet key away until I need to neutralize the mechanism. I prepared the crypt door. I carved a depression in the granite, shaped to receive the key of the conduit, the tool that the jet key will become when charged with the mirror's power. My eternal resting place must be the mirror's final prison. I place the silversmith's hammer upon my stone coffin. It will serve as a seal, a reminder of the destructive folly of its maker. On January 12th, 1821, a great triumph, followed by a terrible, screaming realization. I brought the mirror to Mary's bedside. She was weak, the sweat staining her pillow. I told her I had made a perfect picture of her healthy soul. I held the mirror up to her face. It did not reflect her. The image that swam into the silver was not my wife, Mary, ravaged by sickness. It was a beautiful, laughing woman, healthy, vibrant, with eyes that shone with perfect clarity. It was a reflection of her future, a future where the consumption had been defeated. I wept with joy. I had done it. I had captured her perfect state and anchored her to life. But then, the face in the mirror changed. The eyes, still vibrant, suddenly filled with a vast, incomprehensible terror. The lips parted, not in laughter, but in a silent, desperate scream. The mirror was demanding a payment. I watched, transfixed, as the image began to fade, replaced by a perfect, cold reflection of my own terrified face, the face of a man who suddenly understood that his creation did not grant life, but rather selected the next victim to feed the temporal engine. The mirror did not show her future, but her reflection demanded a life to fuel the prediction. It required the psychological shock, the consuming, paralyzing fear, to capture that moment and project it forward as a warning. The terror is the currency. I dropped the mirror. The air in the room became instantly and unbearably cold, colder than the deepest winter. And in the corner of the room, a shadow elongated, taller than the ceiling, a thin, negative space with a mouth that widened into a perpetual, hungry smile. The smiling presence. It was waiting for the terror to ripen. Mary saw none of this. She only saw the reflection of the healthy woman, and she died peacefully in her sleep an hour later, cured not by the mirror, but by the cessation of the fever's agonizing fight. The mirror had claimed the emotional residue of the moment, the knowledge that I had failed and cursed my family line. I took the mirror and the box of holding to the attic, the highest point, closest to the moon's pull. I hid it beneath a loose floorboard. I will not, destroy it with a simple hammer, for fear of releasing the presence itself entirely. It must be contained and sealed in a place where no lunar light can ever reach it again. But the final sealing requires the key of the conduit, which can only be created by the jet key neutralizing the active silver. This must happen during the height of the full moon, the same conditions under which I smelted the ore. I cannot wait a month, the terror will consume me first. Therefore, I have set the trap. I will place the location of the mine into the archives. I will leave the means of containment, the box, the key, the instructions. I will then, using my last shred of sanity, perform the ritual I intended for Mary. I will capture my own terror, my overwhelming guilt, into the mirror. I will go to the highest peak, the cliff edge overlooking the valley. I will look into the mirror, and in the moment before I jump, the mirror will capture the perfect reflection of my final, absolute despair. This terror, projected forward, will become the first warning, initiating the loop for the next unsuspecting soul who finds the mirror. This generational warning is not a gift, but a map drawn in terror. It will force my descendants to face the smiling thing, and hopefully, one of them, one with a stronger will or a sharper mind, will find this journal, understand the true ritual, and finally seal the mirror in the crypt. I pray they succeed, but I suspect the mirror will simply ensnare their victory, transforming the key of the conduit from a tool of containment into a tool of annihilation. I fear the true destruction of the mirror requires a deeper, final sacrifice. Clara finished reading, her hands shaking not from fear, but from the cold, clinical horror of Elias's calculated suicide. He hadn't just created a curse, he had designed a self-sustaining temporal defense mechanism, using his own fear as the first message to kickstart a 200-year game of supernatural hot potato. She stared at the silver key in her hand. It was cold, polished, and charged. The key of the conduit. I suspect the mirror will simply ensnare their victory, transforming the key of the conduit from a tool of containment into a tool of annihilation. Elias believed that burying the mirror in the crypt only contained the curse. Now that the jet key had completed its purpose and become the silver key of the conduit, the key's function had changed. It wasn't just a heavy door opener, it was the final, devastating tool. Clara returned to the family history, the Thorne line, curses, and conduits. She checked the entry for Elias again, noting the map. She realized the map wasn't pointing to the crypt, it was pointing to the original mine from which the lunar silver ore was drawn, the Obsidian Gate. The mine entrance, according to Elias's map, was located deep within the woods on the property, marked by a massive formation of black, non-reflective basalt rock, the obsidian gate where the original jet key material was sourced. The mirror's power came from the moon, its alloys smelted from or pulled from the earth. The only place on the property truly cut off from the moon's influence, and the only substance capable of canceling the silver's power, was the very core of the earth and the material that shielded it, the deep basalt of the mine. Containment in the crypt was only step 1. Annihilation required step 2. She took a deep breath, clutching the silver key. She was done with cryptic notes and frantic midnight drives. It was time for a final, decisive action. It was noon, and the winter sun was bright and high. Clara needed the cover of darkness for anything truly supernatural, but the drive of Elias Thorne was palpable. She had to locate the mine entrance now. She followed the crudely drawn map through the dense woods behind the house, pushing past thorn bushes and tripping over tree roots. After 20 minutes of difficult hiking, she reached the location marked to the moon's spring. It was a small, deep sinkhole in the earth, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, surrounded by huge, jagged, black slabs of basalt rock, the obsidian gate. It looked less like a functioning mine and more like a hole ripped open by a giant, angry fist. The air here was noticeably colder than the surrounding forest, and the scent of damp earth and iron was strong. Clara approached the sinkhole. She looked down into the blackness. The flashlight beam on her phone was useless. The light simply vanished into the absolute dark. She looked at the silver key of the conduit. It was the only thing that could open this, the very material that had sealed the mine entrance in the first place. But there was no lock, only a seam in the basalt slab at the edge of the pit. She realized the key didn't unlock a door, it activated a passage. Clara pressed the silver key against the seam in the basalt. The moment the metal made contact, the key vibrated violently, resonating with the earth itself. The massive basalt slab at the edge of the pit, which she hadn't even recognized as a door, began to slide open with a horrific, grinding screech that echoed through the entire valley. It revealed a tight, narrow tunnel sloping downward into the deepest earth. The air that rushed out was stale, heavy, and silent. Clara placed the box of holding, still containing the mirror, into a backpack, ensuring the lead lining was facing inward. She grabbed a small coil of rope from the car trunk and a sturdy shovel, her mundane tools of choice for dealing with the aggressively metaphysical. She clipped the silver key onto her belt. She would need it to seal the mine after the act. She looked back at the house, a comforting landmark in the distance. She was going into the deepest, darkest place on the property to destroy a piece of evil that had plagued her family for 200 years. "All right, Elias," she whispered to the sealed crypt behind her. "Let's finish this ridiculous inheritance once and for all." She entered the tunnel, the opening of the obsidian gate hissing shut behind her, leaving her in absolute blackness, relying entirely on the small beam of her phone flashlight and the cold, steady weight of the silver key on her belt. The descent was difficult and long. The tunnel was damp and narrow, requiring her to stoop and occasionally crawl. The only sound was the scraping of her boots and the steady drip of water. The air grew heavier, the pressure increasing as she went deeper. She realized she was descending far below the level of the crypt, far below the reach of any moonlight. Finally, the tunnel opened into a small, rough-hewn cavern, the original lunar silver mining chamber. The walls were lined with the massive, black basalt rock, and in the center was a perfectly still pool of water, perhaps the moon's spring, a deep well of black, non-reflective water. But it was not empty. In the center of the cavern floor, a low, smooth platform of dark rock had been deliberately carved. And resting upon it was another item, one that had been left there by Elias Thorne nearly 2 centuries ago. It was a simple, rectangular sheet of the raw, unsmelted lunar silver, or a slab of dark, metallic rock about a foot square. It was the perfect material, the antimatter to the mirror's cursed energy. Clara approached the platform. The raw ore was cold, radiating a natural, profound stillness that felt ancient and safe. She took the box of holding from her backpack and placed it gently on the rock platform next to the slab of raw ore. The mirror inside the box, despite the thick lead lining, emitted a faint, high-pitched whine, the sound of its immense power recognizing its doom. The noise instantly died down, muted by the overpowering stillness of the lunar ore. Clara realized the final ritual. The mirror must be taken out of its protective box and placed directly onto the raw lunar silver ore to neutralize the alloy completely. It was not fire or blunt force that could destroy it, but the raw material of its creation, deprived of the activating moonlight. She opened the box of holding for the very last time. The mirror lay nested in the velvet lining, dull and ordinary. But when she lifted it out, holding the fragile, cursed thing in her numb hands, she saw her own reflection once more. It was her current face, exhausted, dirty, and profoundly resolved. It was not screaming. It was not terrified. It was simply finished. She held the mirror for a moment, looking at the generations of fear it had generated. Then, with a grunt of final effort, she placed the tarnished oval mirror directly onto the slab of raw lunar silver ore. The reaction was not violent, but absolute. The silver on the mirror's surface did not melt or shatter, it simply went dull, its light-absorbing properties utterly extinguished. The metal alloy relaxed, its temporal tension released. A puff of sweet, sickly floral scent escaped the metal and instantly vanished into the heavy air. The mirror was now just a piece of cold, tarnished metal. Clara picked up the empty box of holding. The curse was over. She retrieved her shovel. She had to ensure that not only was the mirror destroyed, but that this entire chamber, the birthplace of the horror, was sealed forever. She spent the next hour working with a manic focus, using the shovel and the loose earth she had brought down to collapse the tunnel entrance, pushing tons of rock and soil into the sinkhole, ensuring the obsidian gate could never be opened again. When she was satisfied, she scrambled back to the cavern opening. The silver key of the conduit was still clipped to her belt. It was still silver, but it was no longer cold, it was just metal. Clara placed the empty box of holding inside her backpack. She climbed the final slope, pulling herself out onto the forest floor. The moment she was clear, she inserted the silver key into the remaining crevice of the obsidian gate. This time, she didn't wait for a thrum or a groan. She simply shoved the key into the rock seam and kicked at it until the basalt slab ground back into place with a sound that was less a roar and more a sigh of immense geological relief. The curse was over. The mirror was buried at the core of the earth, resting on the raw material of its creation. The key, stuck in the rock seam, became one with the earth's natural seal. Clara stood up, dusty and exhausted, looking at the silent, sealed forest floor. She was no longer the messenger, or the victim, or the guardian. She was merely the last descendant of the Thorne line, who had finally finished her inheritance paperwork. She started the long, quiet walk back to the house, the sun shining brightly through the trees. The only strange thing she noted was that the faint, sweet scent of Evelyn's lavender stationery, the smell of the initial warning, seemed to follow her all the way home. It was no longer sickly, but comforting, like a grandmother's approval. She knew she would never look at a full moon the same way again, nor would she ever underestimate the dramatic power of a late piece of mail. But first, she needed a shower. And perhaps a word with Mr. Davies about that terribly loud septic system.